James has something to say about saying things, and we usually don't give our words a lot of weight. Um, why is James so concerned with this?
He has great respect for what the tongue can accomplish, and both on the side of, say, encouragement or blessing, as well as cursing and the fire. He talks about it as this fire that can erupt from it. Um, and as much as we want to go back to that phrase we heard as kids, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me." Um, it's not entirely true, and I think of when there's a communist uprising or something like this, before there's ever a call to arms, there's often a fair amount of words that are being used to kind of coerce the public to kind of adopt such a stance and stuff and to uprise.
We have a tendency to not give a lot of weight or not give a lot of thought to not put a lot of importance behind the words that we say and the words that we choose. And yet all of us, I think, can kind of look back at different times in our life and think about things that were said to us, see the effect that might have had on our lives. So why is it that we're so sensitive to what people say and yet have such a hard time putting weight behind our words?
I don't know, a lack of thought. I don't know. It's a great question, but totally true. And even as we're talking, I can think of things that were said. Go down the list of things like when I was in fifth grade, or and yet maybe why don't we put more consideration into our thought? And it's funny. I can think of some of the things that hurt me the most and stuff like this, and yet I can also think of times where it was the other way around, unfortunately. And still, for things that were decades ago, I have a little bit of regret.
So is James here saying that, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all? Because I remember hearing that a lot as a kid. So is that what he's saying?
He's not saying that exactly. It's still not a horrible rule, but I think that's stopping far short, and I think he's recognizing the great good that can be accomplished with your tongue as well. And I think he's saying you can use your tongue for this, or you can use your tongue for this, but don't be using it for both.
Right.
And there's much good that can be accomplished from it, but also much harm. Make sure you're doing one versus the other.
Right. And so I think that it's possible for somebody to read what James is saying there and just saying to themselves, hey, I can't say anything critical. I can't say anything negative. I can only say things that are positive. And, we all probably have known that person that they say a positive thing to everybody. And probably at some point, we find that helpful and reassuring and those kinds of things. But maybe after a while, when we see that there is no, that's all that's said to everyone in any circumstances, it kind of loses its weight. How do we use our words in a way that's constructive without becoming that person whose words become empty and meaningless because they always just flow in one direction?
One, I think it's not purely intent, because we can have the greatest of intentions and still take some missteps with our tongues. But I think intent has to be there though as well. And is my intent to bless this person or not? When I correct my child, is it just Caleb, I can't stand your guts and I'm gonna criticize you today, or is it truly my desire that correction takes place for his blessing? And I think we've all received criticism that maybe was not meant for blessing. But at the same time, I think maybe we've all received criticism that was meant for blessing, and maybe sometimes we haven't received it as such and stuff. But I can't help but think of Paul's letter to the Corinthians that we talked about earlier in the year, and where the Corinthians were brought to sorrow by Paul's letter. And then Paul goes on to say, but it was a sorrow that led to repentance that made it a good thing. And so merely that they received criticism and it brought them to sorrow wasn't, in and of itself a bad thing, as long as it is the kind of sorrow that brings repentance and not death.
Yeah, a lot of the conversations that I can remember that hurt me a lot, I look back at it and see that there was truth in it, and that once I got over the initial shock of it, yeah, it was useful to my life. One of the things that James will deal with is the idea of wealth, and so what does James have to say about that, and in what areas should we have concern about wealth?
You know, he has a lot to talk about with regard to not so much that it's evil to be wealthy and stuff like this, but if it's at the expense of taking advantage of the poor, and even something that you use as a tool for oppressing the poor, and something that you gain by oppressing the poor, and he has quite a bit to say in that light, and talks about the judgment that's coming. You might have comfort now, but beware.
Yeah. What is it about wealth that makes it such a dangerous tool? I mean, James deals with a lot of dangerous tools here. He deals with our attitude toward trials and tribulations. He deals with the idea of our words, and then wealth. What makes wealth so difficult?
I think it might be a couple things, and one, I think it's something that we can definitely put on the throne, and Jesus makes it clear that you can't serve God and wealth, but we can definitely make it something that we put on the throne. It's something that we can use to satisfy our desire for comfort if we have enough of it, and things of this sort. But I also remember something you said, I don't know, maybe a decade ago in a sermon, and it said that maybe God hasn't made me wealthy so that I can't afford to be the jerk that I am, or something of that sort. But it's one of those things that, when you're wealthy, sometimes you don't have the same social checks that you might otherwise have if you relied on relationships, for various things. But if you're self-sufficient in a financial sense, maybe you just don't have that checks and balances in your life.
Yeah, I think that it's hard to pursue wealth without having it become too important. You know what I'm saying? Like there's an element where you have to be at least somewhat concerned with wealth, and it's hard to be somewhat concerned with it without being too concerned with it. And then once you're too concerned with it, then there's a world of problems out there. James will talk about the importance of patience and hope. And, it seems like it's easy to go through anything for a very short time, but the longer any problem or difficulty goes on in our lives, that's where it really becomes a problem for us. And where do we find patience? I think that all of us kind of wish we had it, but it's kind of an elusive virtue to possess. And so where do you get that?
A couple of places, but I mean, if it's got to be rooted in faith. If you don't have confidence that in the end, God's going to, one, be glorified in this, that two, he can work this for your good, that there's some good that can come out of whatever trial it is you're going through. But if there's not that faith, I don't know where you get the seed for hope. And once there's no seed for hope, it just seems like you're suffering with no meaning to it.